of the music and all the traditions. We love our Christmas traditions, don't we? I like Christmas traditions. A lot of, Megan and I have formed a lot of Christmas traditions in the time that we've been married. And one of the traditions that is most dear to us came when we were first married. The first year that we were married, we got snowed in. We were planning to go to Arkansas for Christmas, and we got snowed in Ohio. And I mean, everybody was snowed in. Like highways, interstates were shut down all the way to Arkansas. And it was kind of a good thing we didn't try to go. But because we were snowed in and we were planning to be in Arkansas, we didn't have any food in our apartment. We didn't have any decorations up. So we did the one thing that we could do on Christmas Day in that situation, which is to go to the only restaurant that was open, the China Buffet. And so we went to the China Buffet, and that became a new Christmas tradition for us. Every year on Christmas Day, we make it a point to go to the China Buffet. And we have gone to the nth degree to keep this tradition. 4 years ago, we were trying to go from Phoenix, Arizona to Los Angeles, California on Christmas Day. And anybody who's driven that stretch of highway knows that there is nothing but desert between Phoenix and LA. And so here we are trying to get to LA as fast as we can. We are driving as hard, as fast as we can. We don't stop for anything except for gas. We arrive in LA and we're like, as soon as we get close enough, we start hitting the Google Maps, trying to find the nearest China Buffet. And we come rolling in. Finally, we find one. We roll in, half-starved, road-weary, 15 minutes before they close. And they were so happy to see us. Not really. They weren't happy at all. In fact, they were pulling stuff off of the bar as we were trying to fill our plates. But at least we kept our tradition. Our traditions are important to us. They anchor us. They help us connect with the past. They remind us of who we are and where we come from. Our traditions can be really good things. In our church, we have a lot of traditions that help to inform form our understanding of who God is. Over the last several weeks, I've been taking the kids during the children's moment and teaching them, and maybe even some of the adults, about the different Advent traditions that we have that help us to prepare for Jesus' coming. But traditions can also be a hindrance. Traditions can be a hindrance when we care more about the tradition than we do the meaning behind it. They can be a hindrance when they keep us from growing and gaining knowledge and understanding. And one thing is definitely true about traditions, we don't want anybody messing with our traditions. Right? Y'all want anybody? I don't want anybody messing with my traditions. But tonight I'm going to mess with your tradition a little bit. At least the tradition around the birth of Christ. I'm going to mess with some of that. You know, Adam ruins everything. This is Travis ruins everything. So I'm going to mess with this a little bit. You see, the typical understanding that we have, the typical image that we have of the nativity, is that Mary and Joseph come rolling into Bethlehem in the middle of the night. They've been on the road for 3 days. They're tired. Mary is really pregnant, just about to have the baby, like the water's already broke, right? And she's rolling in. They go to every tavern, every inn. They can't get any place to stay because everybody's in town for the census. And so finally, one innkeeper takes pity on them and says, "You can stay out in my barn." And they get out to the barn, and no sooner than they get out to the barn, out pops Jesus in the most complication-free, miraculously easy birth ever in recorded history. And an hour later, when the shepherds show up, there is Mary. She is like, Jesus is sleeping peacefully. Mary's got herself all put together and looks like the picture-perfect mom without even a hair out of place. Right? That's the image that we have, but there's a lot of things wrong with that image. First of all, we know the story was written by a man, because no woman would ever make the birth that easy, right? Or that pretty. And Mary would never be all put together like that right afterwards. But there's more. There's the crazy twist of all this is that there was no inn and there was no barn. There was no stable. So stick with me here for a second. I'm going to take you through this. You might be saying, well, wait a minute. I know in my Bible says that right here it says that Jesus was put in the manger because there was no room in the inn. Well, see, that's where translation gets kind of wonky. Because see, the Greek word there, kataluma, if you want to impress somebody with your Greek, there's the Greek word kataluma, that's often translated as inn, actually more often and more accurately referred to as guest room. And it's like a guest room in a house. In fact, it's the same word that's used when Jesus and his disciples go to the upper guest room for their Last Supper. And so it refers to a guest room in a private residence. And so then you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, because manger though. We know that a manger is like for animals to eat. And so animals, manger, barn, that's got to be like, that in itself must mean barn. But not necessarily. You see, a lot of our images of the nativity, this is Thomas Kincaid, by the way, a lot of our images of the nativity originate in medieval Europe, where that was a very common thing. Barns were pretty common, and so when they say, you can go out and they placed her in the manger, that made sense. But in first century Palestinian homes looked like this. And they had an upper room where guests would stay, and then they had this front courtyard area, kind of like this, with a gate, that they would let the animals in at night. They didn't have a separate place for the animals. And then the family would stay all right here in one big room. And they'd have a couple of little dugout spots in the floor where they'd keep hay for the animals. And so that was the logical place to put a baby. Made sense. Right there in the middle of the family room. But wait, there's more. You see, it says that the verse 6 says, while they were there, it came time for Mary to have her baby. While they were there. See, this indicates that they had been there a while. They didn't come rolling in at the last second. When Jesus wasn't born on the first night that they got into town. They had been there a while, maybe staying in the guest room. But the guest room, as we talked about, having a baby is messy and it's chaotic. And the guest room with other guests and other people was no place to have a baby. And see, this is Joseph's hometown, and so the place that they were staying at, this private home that they were staying at, was a relative. They were being obligated to take them in and to their home. They wouldn't have had to go to an inn or a tavern. And so here they were in this space, in this guest room space, and she's having a baby, and they're like, you can't do that here. You need to go downstairs. So the family takes them into their space and moves things around and makes it possible for Mary to have her baby right there in the living room, right there in the main room of the house. So what does that mean for us? And how does that change our understanding of Jesus' birth? Well, one thing is that tradition would have us put Jesus over there, off to the side, out in the stable, where he's disconnected from our everyday lives. We can go over there and we can visit him once a year, maybe kind of dust him off, and then we can go on about our lives as if nothing's changed. But that's not the real Jesus. That's the Jesus of tradition. But the real Jesus doesn't arrive out on the sidelines. The real Jesus arrives right here in the heart of the home, is born right here in the middle of the family. We have to move things out of the way to make space for him. And he comes right here in the middle of our lives, in the middle of our families. He changes everything. Changes everybody in the room, because Jesus doesn't walk into a situation or arrive in a situation and leave it unchanged. Which brings me to the second thing, which is this story is, a lot of times we hear the story about alienation and rejection and isolation, family being pushed to the side, but this story isn't about that. This story is about radical hospitality and community. Because our life of faith was never intended to be lived without being connected to a community of faith. Jesus couldn't even be born without a community, without a family that surrounded him and brought him into the living room. So here is this story of radical hospitality and community. And yet in our lives, as our collective wealth has increased, we've become more isolated and more alone. We've become functional atheists, as if our relationship with God and our relationship with each other doesn't matter. Or it isn't the very source of our being. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor, he was arrested and martyred for his role as in the active resistance against Nazi Germany. He was in a concentration camp during Christmas when he wrote these words. He said, "I think we're going to have an exceptionally good Christmas this year. I used to be very fond of thinking up and buying presents. But now that we have nothing left to give, the gift God gave us in the birth of Christ will seem all the more glorious. The emptier our hands, the better we understand what Luther meant. We are beggars." It's true. The poorer our quarters, the more clearly we perceive that our hearts should be Christ's home on earth. So as you leave here, and you ponder these things in your hearts, the way Mary pondered all the craziness and the chaos of the family and the shepherds and the sweat and the tears, as you ponder these things in your heart, know this: Jesus has arrived. He's arrived to set us free from the things that enslave us. He's arrived to shine light into the darkness. He has arrived in order to give us community, to bring us into community. He's arrived to disrupt our lives and to heal our brokenness. One thing he won't do is leave things the way they are. So knowing that, won't you welcome him? Won't you bring and make space right in the middle of your lives for him? Make your heart his home on earth this Christmas. Let's pray. God, we give thanks to you that you come and you disrupt our lives. That you love us enough to come right in the middle of things, not be content with the sideline. Help us to make space for you. And help us to open our hearts to you. Amen.